Here we go. All right, let's say a prayer and jump in. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, this time of Easter, we know we believe in you, and we believe in your resurrection that gives us so much hope. We want to trust in you more deeply. We trust in your power to overcome all difficulties, all obstacles. And we ask you to help us as parents trying to raise our children in the faith, in our values. Help us to do that well. Help us to be better parents. Help us to be better disciples of you. Help us to be the parents that our children need us to be. And give us hope and courage in all that we do, in parenting and work, in living through this life as disciples. We might one day enjoy the benefits of eternal life with you, and above all, raise our children to do the same. And we ask this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. So I don't know that I need to give up much background on myself. I'll just say a couple of words. Like, I'm a parent now of 3 boys, 7, 4, and almost 5, actually next week. And then and a 2-year-old. So I went through seminary formation and philosophy, theology, did missionary work for 20 years, came back here to Austin, now do leadership training and coaching. And now most of my clients are Catholic parishes and schools and other Catholic institutions, alongside, businesses, state government entities and whatnot, and always around the same things of how do we be better people to achieve higher performance really in our own lives and in our teams and our businesses and in our workplaces as well. And so when I was asked by Dr. McKenna there in Hollister to give this talk about, what was it, 6 months ago, for some of the parents at Sacred Heart, it really seems to hit a nerve. And looking at my own life, I know sometimes I got it wrong. And part of being a parent is realizing you're not going to get it right all the time. That's just part of it. And so being able to repair when we get it wrong, whether it's in any relationship, frankly, whether it's with our spouse or our children or others, is important. I came across a kind of disturbing statistic, though, recently, which is from Dr. Greg Popchak. If you know him, he's kind of a pretty well-known Catholic therapist. And he published that 15% of kids raised in a Catholic house actually continue to be Catholics as adults. Only 15%. So what's going on? And how do we take advantage of this? Like, the fact that you're putting your kids in Catholic school says a lot already. So let's start with that. What do we want for our children? So here I'm going to ask any brave soul to unmute and come on. Susan, I just saw you jump on. Or anybody else. What do you want for your children?
I can start.
Sure.
I actually want what you just said. The reason why we enrolled our children in Catholic schools is so that they can learn about our religion and continue with Catholicism, for themselves and when they have their own children and so on. And yeah, I believe that statistics, because we have 5 children, 1 in Catholic school now, the other 4 are adults. And I would say of our older 4, there's 1 that occasionally goes to mass and practices, our religion, and the others do not.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think obviously we all know people, right? And if we have adult kids now, it's sad, but that's the reality. And there's a lot of things happening that cause that. So we're going to get into that. And then what can we do? So I think you're right. We definitely want our kids to continue to live the values that we believe in, right? So anybody else, what else would you want for your child? Everybody's probably driving to work. Anybody else want to be brave and come on and share a little bit?
I think for us, this is Rebecca Martinez. There are a lot of the core tenets of Catholicism. I think we want to instill in our son, um, to be kind, to love, to, those kind of things that I don't necessarily think would happen in a public school, or outside of the faith. So those are just some of the things that we try to keep in our minds is, to practice it and to make sure he's in an environment where he kind of learns those things as well.
Yeah, for sure. So let's call those like the core values of Christianity, right? That Jesus came to teach us, that are better. That when we live those things out, it's better for us here, and it's better for us in it's easier to get to heaven, right? So it overall, like, Christianity is all about the fact that, lots of people were trying to be better at living, back from the ancient Greeks, who taught about different ways to do that. And we kept trying, and it didn't work, or it didn't work fully. Some things were better than others, but Jesus came to say, hey, here's the way to do it. So, I know it's hard. Here's the way to do it. And here's the church to help you do it along with you, right? And he gave us the sacraments as the major stepping stones along that pathway. And so we want that also for our children. And a lot of times, like, we can forget it maybe ourselves. I don't know how many of you have had that experience of going to college or whenever it was, and you had to kind of wrestle with the fact of whatever you were raised with, but do I believe it? And what do I believe now? And how am I going to live my life? Then you have children, of course, and it really brings it home. Like, how are we going to raise these kids? Nobody gets an operator's manual. And all of us have relatives. I would imagine. I don't know anybody who doesn't yet, but relatives who have left the faith and are no longer practicing what they were raised with. And so what we want to talk about here, though, is how do we collaborate with the Catholic school to get the best results possible? How do we stay in that in that 15% of kids that do continue to live their faith? And Alicia just put here too in the chat, right? The goal is for our child to know their faith well enough to stand up for themselves and have the ability to be a leader when the world says otherwise. That's a huge point. And so just to say this, what's changed radically in the space, let's call it that, in our country in the last years has been, we have gone from a primarily Christian country, and openly so, to a country that is now primarily, meaning more than 50% of people do not believe anything, what we call the famous nones. So NONES, people who say on a result in a survey that they don't believe in anything, they believe in nothing. And so now we're in this, what used to be kind of easy to do because you could let your children just go with the flow and it was a good flow and they would probably end up being Christian, now is the opposite, for sure. And we all see this in so many ways. So I'm not going to get into that and get, catastrophized. Today is talk about solutions, not the problem. So let's get right to that. The biggest thing that's going to come up is imagine what you want for your child or children. Imagine that child when they turn 18. Think of all the things that child will be living, the behaviors, the virtues, the things you've mentioned, like living out our faith, being kind and loving, obviously being a leader in the world, being successful and however they're going to define that. Of course, there's things, the basic things of having a decent job and a good family and those things. Okay, think of all of that. Now, look at your family today and then think, is there a gap between what we're actually living today, the way I'm raising my child, the way I'm living, and the way I want them to live? The bigger the gap, the less likelihood there is for them to continue to live as Catholic adults. So the goal needs to be, how do we close that gap? How do we put them in a scenario, in a situation, in a lifestyle now that is hopefully identical to what we want them to be living later? And the Catholic school plays a fundamental role in helping to do that. But the key word there is helping. A school cannot undo what's happening at home. And the home is the primary educator of the children. The parents are the primary educators of the children always. The church has always said that. And the school, Catholic school, therefore, any school, but especially a Catholic school, is a huge resource and asset to create that environment when they're outside of the home, but it can't undo what's happening in the home. So this is more about collaborating with the school and understanding what the school can do and what the school can't do, and therefore what your role in all of this is. So here, I want to drive home that point in a couple of ways. One is statistically, we can talk about that. There's a great book. This is a long-term study from all different faith perspectives on what makes the children, again, from any faith perspective, live that same faith as an adult. And there's a bunch of different factors. External factors are important. School is important. Friends are important. But the number one factor, or the first couple of factors are, do the parents actually live out what they say they do? And even more so, this is interesting, is does the father of the children live out, right, in his actual life, what he says he believes? That's the number one determining factor across all faiths of the children continue to live that faith as adults. So we've already seen what doesn't work. We've seen what does work. And then it's like, how do we do that though? It's not easy. So being an authentic Catholic is hugely important. Another thing that I've learned through neurobiology is the importance of attachment theory, and we'll get into this a little bit, not too deeply, but parents end up being the primary way or channel and example of what a child is going to think about God. Like, you represent God for your children. I know that's a big statement, but nobody goes to God directly. Like, we're Catholics and we know that God, comes to us, and religion comes to us because it's taught. That's what the church is all about. And all of us have learned our faith through our grandparents, through our parents, through CCD, through the school, whatever it is. But all of us have been taught about God. But in those first years of development, from 0 to 2, which is when the brain is growing the quickest it ever will during our lifetime, those are the years of pre-memory, when, yes, we don't have explicit memory of those times, of that time of our life, but your brain is building an inherent internal memory of everything happening to you. And so the attachment, a good attachment or a poor attachment, is shaping our brain. And therefore, the way that we interact with our children and lead our children and guide them is shaping both their brain and, in a huge way, what they are going to think about authority. And of course, the biggest authority in our life, which is God. So I can see a definite relationship between my relationship with my parents, which, by the way, mostly is positive, but there's always like, nobody's perfect. And the gaps in what my parents tried to give me and what they actually did. And some of them here I'm being pretty vulnerable, but some of my biggest challenges in my own spiritual life today are those gaps that my parents have had in what they were trying to grow in personally and as parents when I was a kid. And so really important to understand, like, yes, we're not perfect. Even being able to say that to our children makes a huge difference for them to know, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm trying the best I can. I want to learn. And I know that I kind of messed you up. So let's just start with that. Like, don't think you're not going to mess up your children. That's okay. Again, we don't have to be perfect. God doesn't call us to be perfect. He calls us to be good enough. And that makes a huge difference. Okay, so what do we want our children to be like when they're 18 and adults? What's the gap between the way we're living now? How good is our relationship to our children? How is that going to have an impact on their relationship to God, both now at a young age and as an older person, right? And now let's talk about what actually happens. So I'll give you one example here because I like to give examples. It helps drive home some of these points. This will be a negative example, but there's lots of positive ones too. So I realized recently talking to my parents that something the Bible says in the Old Testament, which is kind of chilling, is actually true. And what it says is that the sins of the parent are passed on to the child down to the 7th generation. I always thought, like, that's unfair. How does that work? 7 generations. And what I learned, though, was some of the ways that we think about holidays in our family are direct. Like, I could easily trace it back 4 generations. So my great grandmother, Runke, who grew up in San Antonio, had a very tough time with holidays. German immigrants, living in Texas. I think she was already like 3rd generation in Texas. But they had a really, like, it was not, holidays were not easy, very demanding. Everything had to be perfect, all this stuff. And I realized, like, tracing it then to my grandfather, then to my mom, and then to me, like, oh, that's why we live it this way. That's why these things come up for me. That's why is basically like holidays are not that important. My wife loves Christmas, loves the holidays. It's huge, gifts, everything, everything about it. And to me, I was pretty kind of like, I don't know. It's okay. I like it. We go to mass. That's pretty much it. And it started to make sense for me. So these family stories of origin and these generational stories had a huge impact on how I see Christmas and how I see everything around Christmas, including the birth of Jesus and all these other things. And so these stories, in this case, kind of a negative story, but helped me to make sense of our family history. And then it gave me a path forward because I said, oh, I don't have to be bound to that. Because I understand the origin, though, I can say, great, that's where it came from. What do I want my family to do for Christmas? How do we want to live it intentionally and not just based on kind of this unwritten internal memory that's, again, been passed on from generation to generation. So let's get more into the weeds then of what to do on the positive side. So discipline is a huge thing, really important. And what do we do? How do we do that? I mean, this is changing from generation to generation. And so you'll have people now, there's this wide spectrum of people, and I don't think either extreme is really 100% right. But between, like, let's go back to using the paddle at school and spanking our kids, and no, you never do that, and let the kids pick everything and all of that. It's like, well, what am I supposed to actually do, though? How does this work? What I've learned is 99% of discipline is prevention. It's having systems set up and understanding the psychology of this child, not just a child, but this child at this age with this personality. And boy, I tell you, when you have your first child, you're like, wow, we're doing so amazing. You have your second, like, wait a second, same family, same couple, a couple of years apart, And these kids are diametrically different temperamentally, right? Like one's just super sanguine, outgoing, one's super melancholic, and like, what do we do differently? Nothing. They just came that way, right? But they need different types of discipline. They need different type of situations that help them to thrive, and that's not easy. So cookie cutter, one size fits all is not going to work. That requires a lot of creativity. It requires a lot of problem solving. Again, like pre-reason. We say in the church that 7 is the age of reason of a child, but you can see that's not like a cut and dry, like all of a sudden at 6.5, they have no reason, and at 7, they have perfect use of reason. It's a gradual process from 0 all the way to what? I don't know who's the youngest person on this call, but I mean, the brain isn't fully developed until what, 25 or 27, something like that. So like we know that from a neurological point of view. So to call 7 the age of reason is it's helpful. But when it comes to how to raise your child now, don't think that because they're past 7, they have perfect use of their reason. And I know you know this, but because it's instinctual, right? You can see it. But what it points us to is we need to use the law of graduality, understand like their brains are continuously developing. And what might seem super triggering or is really triggering to me because of whatever of my history is been part of this, it doesn't mean that they understand what they're doing. They're just reacting to based on where they're at. So how do I prevent things from happening? I'll give you a great example. My two-year-old now was what, 6 months old? I don't know. He was old enough to pull himself up on the little coffee table or play table where they in the playroom. He couldn't really walk yet. And I was up early with him. He was getting up kind of early in those days. And I put my coffee cup on top of the play table, not knowing he could pull himself up a lot faster today than I saw him do last week. And all of a sudden, huge scream. He had grabbed the coffee cup, pulled it down, and spilled it all over his shirt and part of his arm. And he, of course, I'm freaking out, pulling it off of him, washing him. Was that his fault? 100% my fault. 100%. Like, he has no idea what he's doing. He's just curious. He's a little toddler, not even toddler at that point, right? And I could freak out at him, but it's pointless. Like, that should have been prevented by me. So let's keep moving along, right? All of this shows us that we have the opportunity to show what good authority looks like for our children. And that should be primarily based on a healthy relationship and attachment, not as friends. We're not trying to be that. We're trying to be more like a coach for our children. And this is going to look different again at different ages and different times of different kids, but it's our goal to guide them without, I think, trying to force them, because that doesn't work. Like, they have free will. They want to make choices. And what we try to do is let them make as many choices as they can, because a lot of choices they're not going to be able to make. We're going to have to make the call. That's our job as parents. And now that our 7-year-old is older, we're starting to talk about that more openly and just saying exactly that. I realize a lot of like rules we had growing up seemed pretty arbitrary. And part of it was because my parents never took the time to kind of talk through, why is that the rule? Is that the right rule? Does it make sense? Does it make sense now for this child at this age and all those things? So the school gives you guidelines on faith specifically. So this has been kind of broad. Let's bring it in specifically to faith. The school's going to do all kinds of things that if you don't know what to do, just imitate the school. Just learn what the school is doing and do those things at home too, which are like what? Daily prayer, regular sacraments, opportunities to talk about faith through religion class. But don't leave it to the school to do it all. Like, you need to be the primary one driving this. And I'll say this here too, like, I really think dads, and I see some men on this call, which is great, dads do need to be the primary leaders. And women have a certain sensitivity to religion, I think, that is really important. So each have their own role, but dads do need to take a leadership role in this. That doesn't mean like you as a wife need to hang back and just, okay, whatever he says goes, like I've had my wife, like I went through seminary and all the training to be a priest, right? But she still calls me out sometimes like, hey, I don't think you're doing enough. You need to step up a little bit more, right? Luckily, she doesn't do that in front of the children. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I've been distracted. I've been thinking about work. I've been doing other things. I need to focus on this. So being a leader in faith is super important. And we each have our own role, but that role needs to be taken seriously. Let's talk about just a checklist of things to make sure we're doing then to live our faith as a family and in relationship with our kids and then with the school, right? So daily prayer, we've already talked about, both as a family, but I also say individually. If you don't have prayer time for yourself and you're not strong, then just doing it with the family is not enough. There's all kinds of materials out there now. I'll give some books at the end that might be helpful with all this, but there's lots of saint stuff out there for kids now about saints. We have this book, Meg Hunter Kilmer is her name, writes lots of saint books, both for adults and for kids. For kids, she has it with this huge world map, so they can read the story about the saint and then go put the sticker on the map where the saint lived. There's tons of books too for taking your kids to mass now. Yesterday, my wife said somebody reached out and was like, hey, we're doing online mass because our 3-year-old is going to get distracted at mass. We're like, yeah, but that's normal. Like, don't stay home from mass and from the Eucharist when that's what's going to feed you. Take your child to mass, and it's going to be normal that you're going to have to take him out a couple of times. We specifically go to a parish where there's a large narthex and we can still hear the mass. So whoever's out with the toddler is going to be able to still hear the mass, right? And we also take turns now, and we just know like who gets first shift, who gets second shift with the baby at the time, whoever that is. But taking them to mass and finding a mass and a priest where they're open to that is great. Like our pastor is very clear, and he says, a crying, if the parish isn't crying, it's dying. So having a pastor who understands young kids and is able to be flexible with that is fine. We do have the old couple in our parish that glares families down and everybody just kind of avoids them, but like that's kind of just par for the course, I think. Rites of passage is huge. This is a thing that's more important as your kids, I think, are getting towards the sacraments. There's a great book called Raising a Modern Day Knight. This is a Protestant version of it. It applies the same for women. I think, again, this is what my wife says. Women are kind of more just aware of helping girls kind of learn the rites of passage to become a woman. Men have largely lost that. There's a Catholic version of that book that just came out called Fathering Sons by Dominic Polito. But the same basic ideas. How do you have rites of passage with men, specifically for boys, in their lives who are going to help them understand those things? And I think that needs to start again with First Communion, confession, all those things. So we've said this already, but just to highlight it, Sunday Mass is the big thing, right? Like Sunday Mass shouldn't be optional. Same with Holy Days of Obligation. It can be hard to do when you're traveling and other times, but the more that's just not a negotiable thing, the easier it's going to be, especially when your kids start having those conversations or those disagreements, like, why do I have to go to Mass? And I don't like to go to Mass. In fact, our kids still say it. I'll be vulnerable again. Like my wife used to teach high school theology. I went through seminary and did missionary work and all those things. Our kids told us one day, I don't love Jesus. We would bless them at night, and I would bless them, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And my 7-year-old was like, don't bless me. I don't like Jesus. I'm like, what? Okay, like, what are we doing wrong? And of course, all your fire alarms are going off in your head and your heart. And it turned out that he just didn't like men at all. Okay, he was still young. He loved my wife, of course. Mommy's mommy. Mommies are like just a part of you, basically. But he didn't like any men outside of me, who he put up with. Basically, I think he was scared of most men, and Jesus seemed like the adult Jesus seemed to him like a big, scary man who he didn't know and didn't trust. And so I said, what if I were to bless you in the name of Mary, who we love Mary, we call her Mama Mary, for the kids, and baby Jesus. He was like, oh, I'm fine with Mama Mary, and I love baby Jesus. Like, great. To me, same thing, right? I'm going to bless you in the name of Mama Mary and baby Jesus. And he's totally fine with it. So again, law of graduality. I had to figure out, where is he at? What's going on in his little head, his little heart? What's his logic? And how do I adapt to that? Because that's what's going to help him move forward. Not me trying to insist like, you're a bad child because you don't like Jesus. Like, no, I understand Jesus in my way. He needs to understand Jesus and God in his way. And that's fine. When I left seminary, by the way, I had a really hard time with Jesus for a while too. In fact, it was my brother-in-law who told me, like, that's why we have the Trinity. So I was going through a time when I was healing from some of the family of origin stuff and working on kind of the daddy wound part of it. Initially was a big part. And so I had a really strong relationship for a while with God the Father, and kind of just let Jesus be over there on the side. Now it's changed for me. Now I have a different relationship with Jesus. But that's why we have this richness in our faith, right? That's why we have a Trinity to relate to. That's why we have the saints. That's why we have the church, right? There's people who are going through a hard time in their life. And I've heard really good, solid Catholic therapists say, you know what? Just listen to spiritual music. You can't pray right now. You're having a tough time with God. You need to get angry with God because of stuff you've gone through. That's fine. God can take it. Which, by the way, is exactly the kind of parent we need to be for our children. Like, there's definitely a relationship between the way that God parents us and we parent our young children. And so many times we can see our kids and be like, oh my gosh, they're so stupid. They don't get it. They're going to get hurt. God's saying the same thing to us. God's like, I see you and I see what you're trying to do, and it's not going to work. I know. But we do the same thing, right? And we have to learn through the bumps and bruises and all of that. So let's keep going down this checklist here. Freedom of choice. This is huge. I just, perfect timing, because of course, that's what God's doing with us, is he gives us freedom to choose him, because that's what true love requires. A marriage, which is the agreement between two people who live together forever, that's the sacrament, is actually the sacrament of marriage that is not done by the priest, it's done by the husband and wife, right? The couple are the ones who actually are the, in official Catholic teaching, are the celebrants of the sacrament of marriage. And it cannot be done unless there's free will on the part of both the husband and the wife. Same thing, God wants us to use our free will to choose to love him. And so we need to respect that in our children too, and realize, okay, that doesn't mean that we let them choose everything. We don't let our children choose if we go to mass on Sunday. It was like, nope, we're just, that's a core value of ours, essentially, is like regular attendance at mass. We're going to go. And you can be in a bad mood. Maybe we'll have to sit in the narthex with you or the cry room or what have you. But it's just not negotiable. And you're not, old enough to stay home alone at this point anyway. That'll be another conversation when they are. But we want them to buy into it for themselves. So we already talked about preparing for the sacraments. Again, all these things need to be done not just by the school or the parish, but in collaboration with you as the parent. So think about it as, okay, I'm guiding my child. I'm the primary educator in all things. I'm going to pair up or partner with the school or with the parish on certain aspects, but I'm not going to let that, like, they're not just going to be in charge of that, right? I'm going to make sure, and just like I do with math or science, what are you learning at school? What's interesting to you right now? And I'm going to be doing the same thing with the faith side. reading the Bible, rosary in the car. There's tons of stuff out there now. My wife grew up listening to these CDs called the Halo Express, which was like children's Bible stories. You can't find them anywhere now. They're still only in CDs. I don't know if you can buy them, but there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that's now Catholic content for kids. Even apps like the Hallow prayer app that you can get has great content for kids, Bible stories, saint stories that are super helpful. Same thing we talked about going to mass. There's tons of kids like Catholic coloring books that you can have. So we have a mass kit that's books and coloring things and all that just for mass. So it's more special for them that they don't get to do it home. So there's even, as the kids get older, a book on, in fact, Dr. McKenna has these and gave them out to anybody. Shoot, I didn't bring you that because it's in the car. But it's reflection questions for kids on the you can do in the car for mass and after mass. Super helpful. Our 7-year-old loves that already. So look around, ask around. My wife is much better versed on all the things for kids, and she's constantly kind of updating that bag. The other thing, of course, as they get older is know the answers to the questions they're going to have, though, or look them up. If you don't know them, go to the catechism. Go to magisterium.ai is an AI tool with only Catholic Church documents in there. If you don't know the answers, find them and help your kids understand them. Now, also don't go overboard. And we'll say this, my wife, as a Catholic, theology high school teacher, can sometimes go say a little too much when they need, not because it's wrong, because it's just overwhelming for a 7-year-old to get a 20-minute explanation for some simple question. So again, know your children. This is where kind of the partnership with husband and wife comes in. Pray as a couple is hugely important. We started praying as a couple before we actually got married, when we were engaged, and we have a kind of simple prayer routine that we do every night that's really helpful. We continue that now, and now we incorporate the kids into it. The kids only do part of it. And by the way, like, looks very different with kids praying as a family than it does just as a couple. Kids are get distracted, they're running around. We try to create the best environment we can. We have a prayer altar in the house. It's not an actual altar, although we have kneelers I built for my wife at one point there. But we put all our religious pictures and candles. Kids love the candles. I know they fight about who's going to blow out the different candles. So we try to again prevent that by assigning different candles, and they can buy their own candles and things like that. But it's interactive. And so just like a kind of Montessori approach of hands-on, giving them things to do so that they feel part of it and they're excited by it. Religious art. This is another huge one. So our house is full of religious art. I am sometimes surprised. I go to people's house and I don't see any religious art. That's an easy way to help create this environment around your kids of faith. So there's so much out there. In fact, most art in the entire world, if you look at it, is religious in nature. If you go to museums in Europe and everywhere else, it's like 90% is religious in some way, shape, or form. So it's easy to find stuff. It doesn't have to be expensive, just things around the house that remind them, whether it's a crucifix or a painting or an icon or something. Another thing, and we're about to wrap up here on kind of this, I want to get into Q&A and what's going on in your house or in your family or school. Make holy days special. Again, schools are really good at this. Remembering what's going on in the liturgical calendar. You can download a liturgical calendar and add it to Google really easily, and just say, what's the saint today? Is there a special feast day? Let's have a special dessert or something for that to remind people and make religion part of life. Kids in the mass, again, it's gonna look different. They're gonna have different engagement levels. Oh, another resource now that our 7-year-old is liking as he's able to read more now is what's the book called? The Magnificat. So the Magnificat makes a kid's Magnificat that actually has a whole mass in there, not just the readings, but also the other parts of the mass, so they can read along. And it's super helpful to help him stay more focused. let's talk a little bit more about sacraments. Sacraments are an interesting thing. I mean, they can have a lot of importance as a rite of passage. It's certain, definitely in some cultures more than others. So here we're talking about, first communion, confirmation, marriage, obviously, those kinds of things. Sometimes, though, sacraments have kind of become disconnected from the overall faith journey. What I mean by that is, like, they're a cultural moment. We spend a lot of money on them, maybe we spend a lot of time on them, but then there's kind of nothing in between sacraments. And parishes see this because, people show up when they want to get baptize their children, then you don't see them again. Then they show up when they want to give the first communion, or maybe a quinceañera, and then when they get married and when they die. It's like, where's this person the rest of the time? And that's a symptom of disconnecting these stepping stones from the rest of the journey. So keep in mind, like, where are you in your faith journey? Sacraments are huge, important steps along the way, but they should be part of that overarching journey. And so you learning about what your journey is and what your next step is, whether it's a sacrament or just a smaller step in between sacraments, is really, really important. And parishes are starting to do that better and kind of spill it out. There's lots of spiritual authors who have helped spill out what that journey looks like, but it's going to be different for each person. So knowing where you're at and how you're going to do that is really important. Leticia, great point. Yeah, they provide a calendar at the end of the year that combines the liturgical calendar, usually with what's going on in the parish as well, which is really helpful. So you can take advantage of those resources. All right, we're pretty much at the end here. So again, I already said it, the number one thing we can do is living the faith ourselves, making sure as a family we're living the faith, making sure individually we're living out the faith, and then gradually teaching that to our children. Again, the school is trying to do that as much as they can. And, they also have to have regular classes. And one thing I say really important about a Catholic school is that even the regular classes are using a Catholic anthropology, a Catholic understanding of what the human person is, to teach all the subjects. So that understanding, that underlying kind of vision of the world and the human person is hugely important, and something that you can try to do in other schools. You could do it in a charter school, and I know some that do a pretty good job of it, but you can't do it openly. And so the fact that you can have a Catholic school that does that openly and explicitly is hugely important. But again, a school cannot undo what negative things are happening, and can't force a child, nor should it, to live the faith or to want to live the faith. The primary way to do that is through you as a parent. So again, the point here is not to downplay what the school can do, but to put it in the proper perspective so that you get the result you want for your children. So partnering is I think the right way to understand this and to work together. And by the way, go to whatever your school offers, right? Go talk to your child's teachers, their religion teacher, their principal, like, understand what they're doing and how to be part of that. And schools are always asking for help, by the way. Like, schools need all kinds of help. So offering whatever you can do to assist in that is going to be hugely beneficial. I'll finish here with a couple of books, and then we'll just have Q&A. So I already mentioned Raising a Modern Day Knight by Robert Lewis, and the Catholic version of that, Fathering Sons, which, by the way, is not just for sons. Really helpful, but I think that's just the kind of where the biggest emphasis is right now, given that a lot of dads are struggling with that. Another one is The Revolution of Mercy by Bonnie Landry, which is a Catholic book about how to parent in a loving and merciful way to be more like Jesus to our children. Another one, this is a Protestant one, I believe, but is called Flourishing Family by Amanda and David Erickson. And I can send these out too, maybe as an email follow-up. But those are good books if you want other resources that talk about this topic. So let's stop there and say, action item here would just be, what's your next step? So where am I at in my faith journey, and how do I take my next step so that I can be the kind of, first of all, the kind of disciple of Jesus that I'm called to be. And then secondly, so I can be a better leader for my children. Right. And of course, Catholic school educators and people, I see Dr. Pinnell on the call, Dr. McKenna helped organize this. They're huge advocates of you collaborating with the school and reinforcing what's already happening, right? So I'm going to stop there. I could keep talking forever, as you can see. Leticia, what the book I mentioned, maybe the one I didn't mention, or I mentioned didn't, I'll drive home. This one called Families and Faith, which is by Vern Bingston and some other collaborators, Bengtson. This is how religion is passed down across generations. Again, it's pretty dense. This is more of it's like a 30 or 40-year study across generations and across religions. It's the biggest study of its kind. And that's the one I referenced that said, the greatest impacts on your children living out their faith are not just what you say you believe in, but you as parents living it out in reality. And then even more important than that, the father doing that particularly. So it's, and this is why, like, being on the same page, even if you don't have the exact same faith, but being on the same page as a couple about what your core values are as a family, making sure those align with Christ's values, right, of faith and hope and charity and all those things is, I think, really, really important. All right.
I had a quick question. I am an attorney, and so when I'm presented with a question, I have to do research. And when I look it up, I know there's the law, and then there's case law that kind of expounds upon it. And it's really important to know my sources, where that case law, how it's been handled afterwards. So when I'm presented with a question from my kid who I don't, where I don't understand, I don't know exactly how to answer it. And I understand, I can always go to the catechism, and you had mentioned another resource, but how do I approach answering a question that isn't explicitly, handled in the catechism in a way that isn't confusing or is in line with the church's teachings, without, necessarily having to go to a priest, for example?
Yeah, great question. So I'll say the first thing is get curious. And what I mean by that is, don't assume that whatever comes to your head when your child asks a question is what's in your child's head. So getting curious means, hey, that's a great question. Why are you thinking about that? What made you ask that question? Just getting a little bit more information can be really, really helpful. So I'll use a really, maybe even more delicate topic. So I went through, at one point I was teaching a Catholic high school and with a bunch of boys, and I'm like, I need to get a better understanding of Catholic teaching around sexuality and all that stuff for these kids, whatever they're going through. And so I went and did that. And in that conference, or in that it was like a 6-week deep dive into all of that to become a facilitator for kind of Catholic understanding of sexual ethics and education. And one of the main things she said is, like, imagine your 13-year-old daughter comes to you, or a daughter comes to you and asks, hey, mom, what's this thing? And pulls out a tampon. What's your response? Well, the response will be very different if it's a 13-year-old girl versus a 7-year-old girl. Why? Because the 7-year-old is just like, I'm just curious. I saw it in your purse and I just don't know. It's like, oh, that's for mommy's health or whatever, right? Versus a 13-year-old who needs a much more, detailed answer, right? but it's not the same as like, well, obviously. So let me stop there. Like, that's the first thing. Get curious, understand what they're asking about, and don't assume that you need some sort of like deep theological question. It might be a much simpler kind of answer, um, uh, right, based on where they're at. Secondly is, this is why it's so important that you keep educating yourself. Like, don't assume because you got all the sacraments, because you went through Catholic school, you know everything. That's a license to learn. In other words, there's always more to learn. There's always more layers. Like, all of us should be educating ourselves consistently, whether it's through podcasts or a Bible study or whatever it is, because there's always new understanding of the faith. The faith is given to us in like seed form. And the church over the last 2,000 years has been pulling that seed out, letting it grow, understanding it deeper. But there's constant deeper understandings of theology on the church level, for one thing, right? And then also just on our personal level. So, and then the last thing I'll say is like, just give it a shot. Like, this is what I think right now. But, you know, if they wanted more information, I'll go and look for it. And I say, now, thankfully, you can Google it and just say, okay, what's the Catholic understanding of this or that? Another one is like, go back to the simple catechism. I'll say, like, this is probably a simpler form. The Baltimore Catechism is still valid. All the catechisms published in church history are still valid. The most recent one, I don't have it right here, is, you know, the current catechism, which is a huge brick. And like you said, like it'll have something probably about everything, but a lot of times it doesn't have the specific answer you're looking for, and it might take a while to get to it. The Baltimore Catechism, published, what was that, I guess in the 60s, if I remember correctly, has like short, simple answers. And those are really good for kids, actually. They're also, I wouldn't say you force your kids to memorize them, but they like that. Kids actually are much better at memorizing things that are short and simple, and it sticks with you forever. So I know some of the answers from the Baltimore Catechism even today, because I had to read it or study it in, I guess. So, and happy to get more into the weeds about whatever you're at. But again, like, as a lawyer, I can understand where you, like, professionally, you're going to want to have a very solid, thought through answer. Kids, like, you've got to get down to their level and understand, like, I just need to give an answer that's adequate for them today. And then maybe it sparks in me an interest of like, I don't know much about that. I need to go find out more. So, let me read this comment. Your statement about the father of the family being important is very crucial for all parents to know. Definite lack of dad involvement at the school. Was this directly to me? Yeah, and we need that. So, you know, dad's getting involved, and a lot of times too, dads like want to get involved in a way that is more hands-on and active than just teaching, perhaps, which is fine. Like, that's super important, but you're showing it. I think a lot of like groups of Knights of Columbus, I've heard people say like the Knights aren't doing very much. They're just doing, you know, it's not fully on mission with like evangelizing or teaching. They're just doing pancakes. I'm like, just doing pancakes might be oversimplification, because if you're practicing the faith and creating community, doing those things that most men like to be part of, like some kind of doing something rather than just talking about it, that's hugely important. So I would say, don't downplay that. Just find the way to get involved, whatever that might look like. Yeah, does anybody else have any specific questions about your situation or scenario? Or
I have I guess a quick statement and then a question. Because my kids are older, and I do remember you mentioned earlier when, when they were little, I did think, oh, maybe we shouldn't go because I don't, this one child's really fussy, but someone gave me or told us what you just said, like, no, like they have to learn, they'll get used to it eventually, the little ones at church, and to be at mass, and now that, yeah, there might be someone who might, I don't know, get dirty looks, but now that my kids are older, I love when I'm sitting there and I hear a little baby, even if they're fussy or crying. I don't know, it's just, I love it. But okay, that was my statement. But my question is, have you done any reading or research? Because I know, like, they're little, the children have this like blind faith, right? Oh, they have a Jesus heart, and right, and they're just, they love like the religion, and then they get older, they start to question, they get smarter, and some of them might get rebellious, or they might be, I don't know, not very happy with some of the teachings, and so they don't really practice, right? Like, or not as active. But do you find that even those, and maybe that's who we're talking about now, but as they get older, do they come back to the church? I mean, I feel like, they get wiser, they become,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
maybe they have
There's
children themselves that might motivate them to come back.
Yeah, there's definitely a boomerang effect where as children get older, like all of us do, we have to wrestle with what do I personally believe versus what does my family believe and what have they taught me? And we all of us have to make that jump to or that transition to I'm going to live this intentionally on my own. So that boomerang of like kind of leaving and coming back is a pretty normal thing. The other thing to say though is that the families that um, make faith an enjoyable part of life is probably I should have stressed this more at the beginning. Like if faith and going to mass, like I remember my parents arguing like, in the car on the way home from mass, and all of us kids were like, what the heck? Like we're just talking about how to love like Jesus and all that. And now we're just going to fight about it. That doesn't seem to make any sense. And it didn't. Right. And so we had to wrestle with the like, okay, that's not what Jesus actually said. And maybe my parents are just having a hard time for whatever reason. And um, so there is that aspect. And the more we have a healthy relationship with our children, where they're attached primarily to us as their primary attachment figures, the less likely they are to want to leave that attachment as they grow and go and get attached to their peer group, which is probably going to be like their peer group is not a great place to find direction and coaching, right? And they're certainly not going to be there for them in the future. Like your parents, well, you might be a huge criminal, but your parents are still going to love you no matter what. They might not like what you're doing. Many times we don't agree with what our children do, but the point being is like, hold on to your children, build a solid attachment relationship with your children from very, very young, and then be with them as they make their own decisions and all those things. Part of it is like not freaking out. I mean, maybe you do freak out. That's normal. But like when your kids are going to test you and say, well, like my child, they're like, I don't like Jesus. I hate Jesus, or whatever he wants to say to test us. Like, okay, I don't like that you said that, but I'm an adult enough to understand this is not a reflect, like this does not reflect who my son is. This is just him having a bad reaction. By the way, most of the time he has those kinds of reactions is because he's tired or hungry. Hungry is like 90% of them, I think, right? So most of our reaction now is like, when was the last time you ate something? Did you have any protein today? What is this, a sugar reaction? Like, this is not, and of course, it's different as you're getting older, right? And you're having to have more of a real heart-to-heart conversation with your children about, okay, this is up to you to believe now. I've taught you what I believe. It's up to you to wrestle with this now. And how do you do that? And here's the retreat you go to as, to prepare for your confirmation and those things. And even being okay with them holding back. My older sister has 7 children. All of them are now still Catholic. But she's had a hard time. One of my nieces, who I was really close to, didn't want to do her first communion for a long time. And she's like, why not? I finally sat down with her. I guess she was probably, 7, 8, maybe she was already 8 or like 9, and she still didn't want to do her first communion. And my sister couldn't figure out why. And so I just talked to her and she's like, I don't like cheese. Like, what does cheese have to do with first communion? She's like, I don't like cheese and I don't want to eat that cheesy thing they give you. And I'm like, it's not cheese. So I finally got her an unconsecrated host and said, look, this is basically bread. It's like a cracker. I mean, here, taste it. She's like, and she touched it and was like, oh, I didn't know that. I was like, okay, I'll do my first communion. So again, I had to get curious, not furious, and understand what was going on in her head at that point. Um, Later, this is also just a very rebellious kid. Like that's just the way she is. She didn't want to do her confirmation later, kind of when it was the typical age. And my sister had to be patient. Later, she was dating a Protestant, so everybody's freaking out, like she's gonna become Protestant, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, he actually has a really strong faith. I don't think that would be the worst thing in the world to marry this kid and or guy, now they're in your early 20s. But it turned out actually he went through RCIA and then she actually went through RCIA with him and got confirmed and he became Catholic and now they're getting married this year. So like everybody has their own journey. That child's journey was very different from her other children. And just being patient and like I guess putting up with it, but also being firm in what you believe and again living that out, I think is the key here. So I know we're past 12 o'clock. I'm going to stop the recording. I have some time if anybody wants to continue, and I'll send out an email with my personal email and contact info if anybody wants to talk more about this or reach out to my wife or anybody else. So let me just stop the recording here. And thanks for being here. We're gonna end with a glory be, and then yeah, anybody who wants to stay on a few minutes, more than welcome.